That's not the main cycle. If you look at the Epoch data, the Iceland core data, or the Greenland data, what you're going to find is a 105,000 year cycle. That's the big one. And I think that is the crustal slip cycle, and that the last one just happened, and we're good for 85,000 years, thankfully. But it's not like rosy news, because after the first cycle, after the 104,000 year cycle, David, you have the first precessional cycle. Then after that, it's an ice age for the next 4 cycles. The next 4 precessional cycles is a deep ice age.
The new normal? Uncertainty is the new normal. War, pandemics, partisan politics, and Jerome Powell. There's a consistent sense of tension, fear, and anxiety since this pandemic. The stock market's gotten crushed, our national debt soared, and inflation pummeling most Americans. Since March 2020, gold's up 30% and silver doubling. Now we have Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo all forecasting gold well above $2,000 an ounce in 2022, and even potential price targets of $3,000. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the No Fee for Life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-800-356-4470 for a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live right now with a good friend of mine, David DuByne, and one of the most prolific independent journalists when it comes to mini Ice Age conversations. One of his channel Adapt 30, talks about the current shifts and our sun moving forward and how that affects civilizations. He's one of the top experts in civilizations around the world and how they're affected by weather. And recently, he's been taking the deep dive into the Great Reset and the work of, let's say, Charles Schwab and what's happening worldwide with supply chain disruptions, food supply failures. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. That's quite some introduction. You being a world expert as well, and a geologist that sees the cycles locked into the rocks.
Well, I'm researching in academia and lots of the papers, and I have the paleoclimatological background, but you've delved into the literature, and your specialty is one that's dear to my heart, and that's the type of work you've been doing for over 6 years over at Adapt 2030. And also your new podcast, which is Mini Ice Age Conversations. And there we have it right there to the right. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you discuss on Mini Ice Age Conversations for those that don't know?
Yeah, the same things Dime and I are going to talk about. I mean, whether it's a long-term cycle that can be mapped in the rocks, or whether it's a short-term cycle that's civilization collapse or societal collapse, population migration, economic reset, and government restructuring. I mean, these cycles are cycles, whether it be the, let's say the La Nina or the El Nino patterns, those are a mappable cycle. The 11-year solar cycle is a mappable cycle. Well, so are, how do you say, signs in the rocks that we're going through cycles. So, you know, when you start to talk about how does it bring it to the current economic and how are people going to react? It doesn't matter, because it's all experienced through civilization and human history here. Long-term or short-term, it's all cycles. And, you know, once you start to read the cycle and you can get a timeline gauged on where it onsets and where it intensifies, then you can see how governments would react and spin and try to control the narrative or ride on top of the natural cycle, like I believe is happening now. And then here we are, we sit today, you look at the news, it's exactly what it would need to be to distract away from natural food shortages caused by solar activity, moving jet streams, and cloud cells. Well, I guess that's the way we'll start the thing tonight.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, you and I, for over 5 years, have been warning about food shortages that were coming in 3 to 5 years, and we were warning about migrations coming in 3 to 5 years. And now here we are. The climate hasn't shifted
drastic.
significantly, but it has. We've reached back down to baseline of the last 30 years of temperature in the last monthly update coming from the UAH global satellite. But geopolitically, the world is a different place. And we've seen just in the last few years, mass migration of people. And now with this war in the Ukraine, we have tens of millions of people, mass migrations again. And this is just ramping up. What are your thoughts on the ramping up of the migrations? And then we'll get to the food shortages.
They all overlap. See, the extremes on the cold or the heat where we're coming into, it's starting to be felt or seen now. And it seems like the winds are really out of kilter, and it seems everything's a little bit windier, which would be expected if your atmosphere is going to go out of sync during this same cycle. But again, you had to mask that. So think about it. You got two choices here. You're a set of world body governments back in, say, 1990, and you have two choices. You can tell the masses what's coming in the next solar cycles that will usher in this ability for us not to be able to grow enough food on the planet because the planting and the harvesting season will be out of the normal range, and we might get some losses and gargantuan losses because of early freezes or late freezes all coming in the springtime. Or you could come clean and say, hey, we're going to have a huge problem coming up in the 2020s, and we need to get our communities ready, and you need to get way more self-sufficient and get off the decentralization here and come back into local communities like our grandparents or pioneering lifestyle communities did. But nope, they took us right down into the centralization boulevard, if you will, and everything got centralized. And there's so much dependence on the central systems for delivery of everything. That's going to get yanked out because it just doesn't seem to work during these grand solar minimum cycles. And you need to mask it at the same time because you could never be blamed for not warning the people on a cycle that was known that was inbound onset at this time. So distraction away, here we go.
Yeah, and it's becoming ever so clear that this is actually part of the plan, depopulation, and in a big way. But it's like I've been saying on my channel for years. It's more than half a decade. The changes that we discuss, like everyone's expecting for like the aha moment, the big boom, the end of it all. But what happens is it slowly changes. Change is hard to measure through, as you are experiencing change, you can't really experience it. It's only down the line, 8, 10 months, a year later, where you're like, oh my goodness, things have changed. And we're sitting right there. The amount of change in the last 2 years has been so massive. There are actually probably half the population thinks that at some point we may go back to the way things were. And that's not how this works. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, the progress is always forward. And the people over at the WF are talking about how we've entered the new world, and we are definitely not going back to the old world. So when you got some of the constructors or, financiers and leaders in thought and business moving society in a certain direction, the same leaders pushing all those buttons are saying, we're not going back.
Yeah.
So we're definitely heading forward here. Something new and, sustainability goals, et cetera, would have a nice blueprint of where they want to go from now until there.
Yeah. And I think that enough of the public is waking up to the fact that none of this is in their best interest. Do you know what I'm saying? Gas going to $7, $8 a gallon is not in their best interest. Food doubling is not in the majority of people's best interest. So it falls on our shoulders, independent journalists like you and I, to be, and this is what we've been doing for 6 years, for goodness sakes. We've been telling people to become sustainable, and we need to warn the public. At the same time, we were just discussing this before we hit the record button. They are doing their very best to silence us.
Well, that's interesting. You and I going through the same kind of censorship things here. Warned off, don't talk about that too much. You're going too heavy into the timelines. You're going to spook people. Stop what you're doing. And then Biden blows it out that, hey, we're going into global food shortages right now. I think the cat was out of the bag several months early on this one. Timelines were at the end of May. People would have understood there wasn't enough fertilizer and herbicide to get the yields that we were used to. They're already looking at about an 18% decline this year globally just because there was fertilizer and herbicide shortage. But now we got the Ukraine thing and the whole Black Sea lockup. But Biden let it slip out that the food shortages were coming. So A few people would, I'd say about 60% would have understood what the herbicide and fertilizer shortages would have meant come harvest season. But when Biden came out and said there's going to be food shortages, 100% of people got the message at the same time, like everybody.
Yeah,
you
but
know?
we make so much more food than we need, and it's not really going to be a food shortage, in my opinion. This is the way they're framing it. There's going to be food.
It's control of the food system.
It's going to be a $13 loaf of bread. And so for like $56, you can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that's not going to fly for the American public. That's not going to keep them healthy. That is not going to keep them happy either. So there will be food. It will just be rationed or so expensive that you're completely depleted. And then once you don't have any money, then there's the real food shortage. You can't buy food, so you starve. And now,
or you get on the digital system and you take the universal basic income and get on their digital ration card and then do whatever you're told, because you'll lose your food access if you don't.
Right. And Lee and I were just talking about this. Now, I want to make this very clear to the people listening.
Wait, can I say one thing, Diamond? Can I say
go
one
ahead.
thing? The food shortage is, you're right, it's a food shortage. But for me, it's grabbing total dominance over the food supply of the globe. It is a full-on takeover of the global food supply while you're distracted with the food shortage, because they can ram through any legislation, laws, mandates, whatever they want that can come anew, and nobody will even be bothered to look because they're starving and they're hungry and they're scared. So it's a total takeover. As much as any industry you can think across the planet in the last, say, 100 years, that was taken over and dominated completely by globalists.
Yeah. And what
that's about to happen with the food supply in the globe here.
Right. And when they digitize the money here in the U.S., what they found in researching in the last few years is that there is no way that the U.S. digital currency can be on the blockchain because they can't control it. So it's not going to be a blockchain digital currency. It is going to be a central bank controlled digital currency from the World Monetary Fund or something like that, that every single penny that's transacted, every single penny, right now, probably less than 30% of all money is known what the transactions are. Because it's like where I live, it's all cash. Like no one writes down what you just threw $30 on. And so, but once they shift, every single penny is going to be known. There will be no way to not pay your income tax.
Distributed ledger settlement, I think, is where they're going to go. They've been talking with Ripple for so long. And, that whole thing when XRP got stuck off to the sidelines and nobody could trade it and every exchange dropped it. Again, look at the narrative, just like COVID. Every nation followed lockstep. They all had the exact same protocols across the entire globe, and that was it. Bam. Now we're seeing the exact same thing with food. Now they're all talking about food shortages, food, lockstep across the entire globe. They're going to ration it. But then with XRP, the same thing. And all across the entire globe, the same parroted narratives in media. Don't touch it. It's the security. Don't touch it. Totally delisted everywhere. But suddenly, IMF and Bank for International Settlements talking about using it as a settlement instrument, and to piggyback on that for exactly what you're talking about here, central bank digital currencies and the new digital dollar. Like it can literally run every single currency of every country on the planet. And I think that's why it was taken offline, so it couldn't be traded, but now it's held. So if you own some, you just won the lottery by having some before it got delisted. So it'll be a distributed ledger settlement. But yeah, there's always going to be people outside the system though. There's always going to be trading, bartering, black market, gold, silver, anything. I need a tool. You need some fruit. I need some seeds. You need a shoelace, whatever. I make shoelaces. I got the wax here. We got bees. I make my own fabric because we save the cat tails down at the pond there, and we, whatever. There's always, it's cattail season coming in. So I'm, down here looking at the pond, waiting for them to come up with the grass, figure if I want to get the shoots or if I want to wait for them to go to the small heads or harvest the pollen this year or what. I don't know. This cattail season coming up. So we got 2 ponds real close to us.
Okay. What are you prepping now the most as we move into this shift? What are you doing?
Knowledge. Because if somebody has a sliver of a skill and then we have either a book or, I know downloadable stuff might not be the best unless you have your own complete power system to be able to get it on your device, but to get as much knowledge as you can now and build those skills and find other people who have similar skills at this time while we can. I really think we don't have much time left, Diamond, like seriously, just months, plural. And it's going to start to implode, and you'll see a lot of lockoffs and countries not exporting food. And then there'll be that whole monetary downturn because people can't trade or buy. There's no GDP for a country anymore. It's meant to collapse. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just meant to switch systems
Well,
and take all the wealth with it from one old system into the new system.
the beautiful thing is the sun is ramping up and it's shooting lots of coronal mass ejections directly towards Earth. This is a little change from the last ramp up in the last solar cycle. And the Earth facing quiet seems to be dialing down a little bit. The last
Faraday cage ready. Did you get it? Who's gotten a Faraday cage ready?
Raise your hand. All right. So what I'm
That's
saying is my prediction is that by summer of 2023, which is just about 16 months away, I think that we're going to start to see some grid failures and that their plans will crumble. And I'm counting on this. I'm counting on all of the globalist clutches unraveling from one pop from the sun. And if it's not next year, it will be in 2024 or 5 during the peak of the solar cycle, where we're going to see some grid failures and the Iron Curtain fall, because literally it will kick small sections of the planet back into the Stone Age. And luckily, we've had years to prepare, and there will be small outliers and groups all over Europe, all over Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. There are permaculture villages all over the world. China has some of the best growing capabilities with the south-facing Korean-style greenhouses with the bamboo coverings. So we will survive and thrive in the future. It's just that how long will it take during the transition, the unrest? We've been warning about this for years. It is going to be a very rough ride from now. It doesn't get any better, in other words. It slowly gets more and more dystopian and weirder.
But more and more self-sufficient on the same way.
Yeah.
And, I had a strange thought because you were talking about the kingdom of Mu there. And if we do trace back through several epochs of history, perhaps what you're talking about, those pockets of people that will be left in 2,000 years or 4,000 years or 8,000 years of reading a history book, that will be the new civilization that rose out, that had the tech, that repopulated the new world, that began the new tech, the new systems, the new farming techniques, whatever it was, of the new mathematics, engineering, etc., of those pockets of what we have now, surviving through this and passing that knowledge down. But you got to wonder how many times this has happened prior. What about the last interglacial? I keep going back to that one too.
Yeah.
So, it does seem like it's almost a repeat. And do we get to this cycle? Because you got two ways to look at it. Either elite have protected all what you're talking about, this infrastructure and the digital blockchain and all these things underground and hardened it. So it is the new system when it reemerges after all the chaos is finished here about 2030, 2035. And then they pop out as, seemingly magicians or something because they have all the tech that was left over from underground. Or we go the other direction. It truly is lost except for the pockets. And the population regrows after that, and it just re-arises, and then we repeat the cycle, and then we get back to this point again, and then the sun does its thing, and then we get knocked out again. And we've just been in this continuous cycle for how many millennia or millions of years?
Yeah,
I mean, you can go as deep as you want on the conversation like that.
Yeah, well, I can see like sustainable communities like Oppenheimer Ranch Project and our neighbors gilding together and creating a pocket of a new civilization, which we have a new name for. And it starts at these central seeds, and everyone joins, and it builds out from there. And that's the only way it's going to happen if we want to be resilient and abundant during the shift. Because the moment the grid goes down, there's going to be a lot of crying, whiny, I hate to say it, that are not prepared, and that they're looking for someone to hug them or something. The fact is that you got to step up to the plate and listen to someone with some leadership skills and get to work, because this is a whole new world we're going to be building if, in fact, this empire fails in our lifetime.
Oh, within the decade. The lifetime's quite some time away there. Yeah, the resiliency, because if your community was up and running and then it touched with another one in Arkansas that was up and running, and then there was one in Missouri, and eventually would tap back into mine over here, and that would be the new catalyst, perhaps for a new trade route from Colorado through Tennessee to North Carolina.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
That kind of resiliency is what really, if you look back through history, it was those communities that had access to food and water and energy and warmth, and, could have been a cave near a river with abundant fish somewhere, but it always has those same certain elements to it And I think that's why yourself and myself have chosen where we sit, because those elements are right where we are, and cradles of civilization have arisen from these same elements again and again and again. You need those same things. And then eventually there's an overproduction, and then the term called money starts and people trade. And yeah, it's just a repeat. I think we're heading back. I don't know what the cycle linked with this one is. I think it's 400 years or 2,000 years. Maybe you could speak to that better than I.
What was the question?
Well, I mean, what do you think the cycle duration is on this one? I mean, coming in right now, obviously governments know we're on a super incredibly heavy, powerful cycle, and they're trying to mask it and deflect from it. But
I wish I had pulled up the cosmic catastrophe Iron Cross that was created.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah. We're sitting on the cross again, aren't we?
Randall Carlson. Yeah, we are. And this is my entire scientific research as a geologist. I'm a stratigrapher and a paleontologist. And the work I did was go out in the field all over the country and look at sedimentary rocks. We did some studies in Iowa. We did studies all over the Northeast, from New York State to West Virginia, Pennsylvania, etc. But what we were looking at was the nature of these cycles, because we were working under the premise that a mechanism, and the cycle itself was called the punctuated aggradational cycle. It consists of two parts, a high stand and a low stand, that were separated right in the middle. And it is only now, decades later, that we know what that is, and that's the Iron Cross cycle. So the cycle.
Explain to the novice here the high stand and the low stand. Define
I'm
those
about
two,
to
I guess, parameters for me.
Let's get to that. So every single stratigraphic cycle that we see in well-preserved basins have two parts. They last one precessional cycle, 26,000 years. And one of the facies shows a very deep environment, like deep in the ocean, and another one shows a shallow environment, like the beach, at the exact same spot that we're looking at the rock. So that means the environments have to shift hundreds of miles, or the ocean has to rise and fall hundreds of feet. And this has been happening forever, for hundreds of millions of years, in every basin on the earth. And the last cycle boundary we can go look at in Florida is the Key Largo limestone, which the unconformity is now where we're living. We're living on the unconformity after the 12,900 year event. So the Younger Dryas event happened. And then what happened, David? The sea level rose 400 feet. And whatever environment was being deposited for 12,000 years, all happy and calm, was all of a sudden 400 feet deeper. So you went from a beach to an abyssal out in the ocean. And that's what the cycle looks like. There's a sand portion, and then there's a shale and mud portion. And these cycles happen every precessional cycle, every 12,600 years, which is about a 13,000 year high stand and low stand. Now, we just got done. The biggest devastating cycle boundary was the mass extinction that just happened at 11.5. So it went from 12,900 to 11.5. And during that time frame, that's the cycle boundary, when the sea level rose 400 feet and made a new environment right over the sedimentary rocks. And now for the past 12,000 years, that deep facies right in the same spot, or that deep environment. And right now at this time, we are on what's called the sea level fall surface. So for the next 1,000 years, the ocean now drops 300 feet. And it's been doing this every time. It goes up 300, down 300, up 300, down 300. And so now we're on the sea level fall surface, where the ocean will recede and the glaciers form. Now, what's the mechanism? Because during the Younger Dryas, it got really hot, and then it got cold, and then it got really hot again. So we're expecting it to do the same thing during this potential flexure point. It will get extremely hot, maybe because of a solar outburst, and that will be immediately followed by a rapid glaciation and a sea level fall.
Yeah, but you're talking about 15 degrees Celsius drop, not like a 1/10 of a degree rise like IPCC spots. Right. We're talking about 10, 15 degrees Celsius
on
either
some
direction.
Places on Earth, the temperature drops 23 degrees C.
Cheers.
All right, so
you wake up tomorrow and your average temperature is 23.
Here's the caveat that it takes a long period of time, 500 to
7 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit.
Yes, 500 to 1,400 years for this to occur. And what is the mechanism? Is it a solar outburst that burns the earth, scorched earth, everything gets heated up, and then clouds form and it gets dark, and then it's snowball Earth. It gets freezing cold and it snows for a decade. I mean, this is what we have to look forward to. If this event happens in our lifetime, wow, you better get out your notebooks and start taking notes and burying those pages.
You know what's happening because you're watching Diamond, who's super hot. Just describe the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing that I don't like is the IPCC here is squawking about a tenth of a degree, a quarter of a degree rise. But, you know, in just not even 12,000 years ago, it went up 10 degrees Celsius. And how fast was that rise? Just 100 years, it went up 10 degrees Celsius off the bounce off the bottom of the Younger Dryas. Like straight up.
14 degrees in 150 years. 14 degrees C. That's like 25 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Average temperature. And if the average temperature on Earth were to drop 3 degrees today, it would be snowing all over the place. In places where people wouldn't ever expect it, it would snow all the way to the Everglades for the next month or two if it was that low. A 3-degree temperature shift, average global temperature, is massive. And when we're talking about 0.03 up and down, everyone's like, oh, we're burning up. It's almost embarrassing. It's impossible as a climatologist to even notice the change on the Earth's surface. Weather changes every day, place to place. There's always record highs and lows, always, even in global warming and global cooling. And so it's the deception from the mainstream media and the way they write a headline that if you read the article there is no information in the article about the headline. It's the exact opposite information.
Humor me for a second on a million-year time span. Like if you're looking at the Younger Dryas in a 10 or let's say 14-degree movement of temperature, like where does that register off 1,000,000 degrees? Is that just like a little tiny bump that barely registers? Or, you know, really, if you're looking at a much, much longer time span, let's say 5 million years.
Yeah.
You know, where does that really register on there? As in terms of hugeness on a 5 million year time period, 1 million year, it probably would just be like a little dip, maybe even barely even discernible on that line.
No, not at all. In fact, if you just take a look at the Epoch data, look at all the ice core data and the proxy data that has been laid on that and has been rehashed now for 3 decades. I mean, it's pretty high resolution. The Younger Dryas event is the same exact event that happened 104,000 years ago. This is a 100,000 year cycle. And then if you go back to 230,000 years ago, it's the same event. So this is if you were to talk about
You're getting a square wave pattern then instead of a sine wave.
If you were to talk about it in Mouton-Milankovitch terms, which is what my master's was devoted to, Milankovitch in the 40s, he calculated the orbital perturbations of our planet and our solar system. And the Earth has a wobble, and that's the precession of the equinoxes every 26,000 years. That's not the main cycle. If you look at the Epoch data, the Iceland core data, or the Greenland data, what you're going to find is a 105,000 year cycle. That's the big one. And I think that is the crustal slip cycle. And that the last one just happened, and we're good for 85,000 years, thankfully. But it's not like rosy news, because after the first cycle, after the 104,000 year cycle, David, you have the first precessional cycle. Then after that, it's an ice age for the next 4 cycles. The next 4 precessional cycles is a deep ice age. And the same thing happened in the last 100,000 year cycle. We were in multiple ice ages for 80,000 years after the last interstadial. So there was an interstadial 104,000 years for about 20,000 years, and then it got cold. And it stayed cold until the Younger Dryas event that warmed us up again. And now we've been warm for 12,000 years. And now for the next 8,000 years, it drops way back down to the ice age. So it would take 8,000 years to get to maximum glaciation. But can you imagine the global catastrophe as the sea level drops 300 feet, exposes all the clam poop and sludge? Just imagine the smell. And then ice forms on the polar regions and in all the mountain regions worldwide. Now, what you're going to get is some amazing growing environments, which is why we picked the area here at Oppenheimer Ranch Project. If there are glaciers forming in the Rocky Mountains, every spring we are going to have the most epic freshwater runoff into our valley that has ever been seen. And there is evidence that the river gets 130 feet deep here. It did during the last event. and which is why our barn is 160 feet above the river because we want riverfront.